Hello and welcome. Today we delve into one of the most daring and desperate moments of the Second World War, the Ardennes Offensive, famously known as the Battle of the Bulge, a last-ditch German gamble to carve through Allied lines and seize Antwerp. But beneath the surface of this icy, snow-covered forest, a deadly game of strategy and improvisation was unfolding. Did the Germans really believe that over 200,000 troops, supported by nearly 1,000 tanks, could break through lightly defended American positions in the heart of winter? Were the formidable Tiger II tanks, with their 150 mm frontal armor, invincible against the Allied anti-tank weapons? Could the dense woods and snowstorms ground the Allied aircraft, giving the Germans an unexpected edge? And how did a weapon originally designed to shoot down high-flying bombers, the 90 mm anti-aircraft gun, become a key part of the fight against armored columns? All of these pieces are parts of a larger, puzzling picture. What was the true strength of American ingenuity in the face of a seemingly unstoppable offensive? Did the resilience of the American artillery crews, transforming their tools on the fly, turn the tide of the battle? The answers lie ahead as we unravel the shocking truth behind the Battle of the Bulge, piece by piece. Now, prepare to witness how a quiet sector in Arden Forest became the battleground where innovation clashed with brute force and where the edge of defeat was turned into an unlikely victory. The most intense moments of this historic conflict are about to begin. In the bleak, snow-covered expanse of Arden Forest during December of 1944, an atmosphere of eerie silence seemed to pervade the landscape. The thick blanket of white concealment gave an illusion of tranquility, masking the ominous preparations unfolding beneath the surface. Unbeknownst to many, this seemingly peaceful scene was the prelude to one of the final and most desperate gambles of the Second World War. Adolf Hitler, seizing a last-ditch opportunity, launched what would come to be remembered as the Ardennes Offensive, more famously known in history as the Battle of the Bulge. His strategic aim was audacious: to carve a breach through the Allied lines, seize the vital port city of Antwerp, and ultimately pressure the Allies into negotiating a peace settlement on his terms. At that time, American soldiers had been engaged in extended campaigns for months, and many found themselves stationed along a sector considered relatively quiet and stable, a respite from the intense combat zones elsewhere on the Western Front. Because this sector was perceived as lightly contested and not prone to major assault, most of these troops did not anticipate the scale or ferocity of the direct assault that would soon unfold. Few, if any, could have predicted that within a matter of days, they would be confronted by some of the most formidable armored units Germany had ever massed in one attack. The German strategy was ambitious, bordering on reckless in its boldness. More than 200,000 German troops, supported by nearly 1,000 tanks and assault guns, surged forward with relentless force through the dense, snow-laden forests of Ardennes. The heavy woodland terrain, often thought of as an obstacle, instead became a battleground where the Germans aimed to exploit the element of surprise and the harsh winter conditions to their advantage. Among the elite formations tasked with piercing the American defenses were the feared 5th Panzer Army and the 6th Panzer Army, both under SS command. These formidable units had the primary objective of punching through the thinly defended American front lines. Their armored spearhead was composed of some of the most advanced tanks of the era, notably the Panther and the colossal Tiger II, also known as the King Tiger. These armored giants boasted frontal armor up to 150 mm thick, a formidable barrier that most Allied anti-tank weapons found nearly impossible to penetrate. The Germans believed that with this steel spearhead, combined with the element of surprise in the bitter winter weather, they could achieve rapid breakthroughs, disorienting and destabilizing the American lines before reinforcements could arrive. Conversely, the American defenders were in a precarious situation. Many of their units were stretched thin, exhausted from prolonged fighting, and composed of relatively inexperienced troops or those still recuperating from earlier battles. Their supplies were limited and morale was fluctuating, further compounded by the rugged terrain, which was ill-suited for swift reinforcement or counterattack. Yet amid the American arsenal, there were weapons initially designed for roles quite different from tank combat, most notably the 90 mm M1 anti-aircraft gun. These powerful weapons had originally been developed to target high-flying German Luftwaffe bombers. Characterized by their long barrels, high muzzle velocities, and advanced fire control systems, they were regarded as some of the most effective anti-aircraft artillery in the Allied inventory. Most soldiers and commanders would have considered them specialized for aerial defense, not as a means to counter armored columns advancing at ground level through dense snow and tangled forest pathways. As the German offensive erupted on December 16th, the weather conditions played directly into their favor. Heavy clouds and snowstorms grounded the Allied aircraft, severely limiting reconnaissance missions and preventing the close air support that had typically inflicted significant damage on German units. German columns of tanks and infantry moved forward in a muffled march through the silent woods, engines thundering through the wintry silence. American infantry, caught off guard and with their lines initially unprepared for such a massive assault, were forced into hasty retreats, causing the front to bend perilously under the weight of the German onslaught. Despite this initial setback, some American officers quickly recognized that the desperate circumstances demanded innovative solutions. A number of them began to repurpose and reposition their available weapons, most notably the 90mm guns, transforming them from static anti-aircraft defenses into concealed mobile ambush platforms. These improvised positions were strategically established along likely avenues of tank movement, such as forest paths and roads, turning the terrain into a battlefield of tactics and ingenuity. This adaptation was born of necessity, an unplanned improvisation that would, in time, significantly influence the course of the battle. The Ardennes region, once seen as a quiet sector, became a crucible where doctrine, engineering ingenuity, and raw courage clashed in a fierce struggle. The Germans, confident in the superiority of their armored forces and the paralysis of their enemies, were about to discover that the resilience and quick adaptability of American artillery crews could challenge their assumptions, perhaps even more than the formidable tanks and artillery they had brought into. Amidst the muffled rustling of movement and the tense anticipation that hung heavy in the cold air, young gunners clad in frozen gloves and clutching their rifles with trembling hands meticulously aimed their sights along barrels crafted primarily for aerial combat. These soldiers nestled in the shadows of the winter landscape, prepared for a confrontation that none of the involved parties fully expected, a battle that would challenge traditional roles and redefine the possibilities of battlefield weaponry. On one side, the German High Command viewed the Ardennes region as their last, critical chance to regain the momentum on the Western Front, aiming to seize a strategic advantage that could turn the tide of the conflict. On the opposing side, the American forces found themselves facing an extraordinary situation that tested their resilience, resourcefulness, and innovative spirit. The necessity to transform tools originally designed for a different purpose into unexpected yet potent weapons of ground combat. Among these was the formidable 90mm gun, an anti-aircraft artillery piece that was about to etch its name into the annals of military history by playing a crucial role far beyond its initial design. The 90mm M1 gun had not been conceived as a dedicated anti-tank weapon in its inception. Developed in the late 1930s, its primary goal was to counter high-altitude bombers such as the notorious Heinkel He-11-1 and the Junkers Ju-88, the terror of the skies. The focus of its designers was on creating a device capable of intercepting and destroying enemy aircraft at great heights, with a muzzle velocity that exceeded 800 meters per second. This speed enabled the gun to fire shells weighing around 15 kilograms to altitudes of 30,000 feet or more, making it a formidable asset in the air defense networks of the United States during the early years of the war. Over time, crews operating the 90mm gun became increasingly proficient with advanced fire control systems, including sophisticated predictors and radar-guided mechanisms that significantly enhanced accuracy. These technological developments transformed the gun into a vital component of America's homeland air defenses, providing a resilient shield against Luftwaffe raids. As the conflict expanded into Europe, the familiar weapons accompanied U.S. divisions overseas, serving as mobile yet hefty units that required powerful prime movers for transportation. They often found themselves stationed around supply depots, ports, and critical road junctions, standing guard against relentless air assaults. Despite its primary role, very few commanders initially considered deploying the 90 millimeter gun directly against ground targets. Its design and intended use suggested otherwise. The long barrel and high-velocity shells hinted at a capability for penetrating the armor of enemy tanks, a task far removed from its original anti-aircraft purpose. The potential was evident, and early testing seemed promising. When equipped with armor-piercing shells, the weapon could breach over 120 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters, comparable to the protection offered by German Panther tanks. Historical trials and battlefield experiments gradually uncovered this hidden potential. Before the Battle of the Bulge, some American units had begun to explore unconventional tactics, employing the 90 millimeter guns in ground roles. In Italy, during the years of 1943 and 1944, isolated artillery batteries sometimes fired on bunkers or used indirect fire to hit entrenched positions, often with devastating success. Additionally, scattered reports from the Normandy campaign hinted at the gun's occasional use against German fortified points, though such practices remained sporadic and unsupported by formal doctrine. At the same time, the Germans were well aware that American forces possessed this powerful weapon. However, they believed it to be predominantly an anti-aircraft threat and dismissed its capabilities as primarily related to shooting down enemy aircraft. Their strategic focus was elsewhere. They concentrated on countering the ubiquitous Sherman tanks as well as British anti-tank weapons like the 6-pounder and the more formidable 17-pounder guns. The Germans assumed that when American units deployed heavy anti-tank firepower, it would come from specialized tank destroyers such as the M10 Wolverine or the M36 Jackson, the latter being a dedicated vehicle mounting the same 90 millimeter gun. What the Germans failed to fully anticipate, however, was the adaptability and ingenuity of the American troops, who soon discovered that their 90 millimeter guns could be employed in roles far beyond their original anti-aircraft mission. The potential for the gun to serve as an effective anti-tank weapon was recognized, and inventive units began to repurpose these artillery pieces, exploiting their impressive range, penetrating power, and high velocity in ground combat situations. This unexpected versatility would soon prove to be a significant factor in the evolving dynamics of the conflict, especially during the critical battles in the dense forests and frozen fields of the Ardennes. German ingenuity was vividly demonstrated in their strategic use of anti-aircraft guns, repurposed as formidable ground tank defenses. These weapons, often buried deep behind road embankments or tactically placed at critical crossroads, served as a harrowing obstacle for advancing German armor. In the chaos of the Ardennes offensive, the strategic placement of these guns proved to be an unexpected advantage for American forces. Many of them had been stationed near vital logistical hubs, precisely the locations where German armored units aimed to break through and disrupt supply lines. American commanders, recognizing the opportunity these weapons presented, responded with urgency and agility. They swiftly redirected and repositioned batteries, making quick adjustments to their firing directions. Fire control teams worked tirelessly, stripping down their equipment to enable more immediate and direct aiming at advancing targets. Meanwhile, ammunition supplies, specifically armor-piercing shells, were rushed forward by every available means of transport, despite the difficulties posed by the snow and mud that hampered movement in winter conditions. Once properly set up, the 55 caliber 90 millimeter gun became a dominant force over extensive stretches of open terrain, commanding long-range fields of fire. The crews, trained initially to track fast-moving aircraft, found that targeting slow-moving tanks was an easier task, particularly at ranges where German tank crews felt relatively secure from return fire. The technical superiority of the 90 millimeter weapon lay not solely in its raw power, but also in its remarkable versatility. Its high rate of fire, combined with shells capable of being fitted with time fuses, made it an effective weapon against enemy infantry, as well as armored vehicles. In the bleak winter landscape of Belgium, a single artillery battery was capable of holding a village or a strategic crossroads, delivering a combination of anti-tank fire and indirect bombardments against advancing troops. American soldiers who had once doubted their ability even to confront the formidable German Panther and Tiger tanks suddenly realized that with proper integration of support units and effective tactics, even the most heavily armored German machines could be brought down. This insight spread rapidly among the Allied ranks, providing a vital psychological boost during the bleakest days of the German offensive. When the German counterattack gained momentum, the effectiveness of their armored spearheads relied heavily on the overwhelming firepower and resilience of these formidable tanks. The Wehrmacht had assembled some of the most formidable armored vehicles ever seen in Europe. These tanks exemplified both Germany's advanced engineering skills and the desperate hope to reverse the tide of the war. Central to these armored divisions were the Panther medium tank and the Tiger II, commonly known as the King Tiger. Each represented a new echelon of firepower and protection that American and British soldiers had come to fear since their experience at Normandy. The Panther, equipped with a 75mm KWK 42L70 gun, was renowned for its exceptional accuracy and formidable penetration capabilities at long distances. Its sloped armor greatly enhanced its protective qualities, making frontal attacks by the standard Sherman tanks virtually suicidal. Meanwhile, the Tiger II, an even more terrifying adversary, weighed nearly 70 tons and boasted frontal armor that was up to 150 millimeters thick. Its 88mm KWK-43 cannon was capable of destroying Allied tanks at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers, instilling fear and respect in all who faced it. German crews, many of whom were veteran soldiers from the Eastern Front, possessed a deep confidence in the power and reliability of their tanks. They anticipated that the Ardennes campaign would echo the successes of 10 years earlier, when German armor had had little opposition during its rapid sweep through France in 1940. Supporting these titanic machines were a variety of other armored units, including numerous Panzer IV tanks, which remained reliable workhorses, and specialized assault guns such as the Stug III and Jagdpanther IV. Together, these vehicles formed deadly armored wedges, designed to punch through the thin American defenses, seize control of vital road junctions, and create chaos within the Allied logistical network. Although the terrain was challenging, the Germans believed that their carefully coordinated armor formations would carve through the American lines, unravel supply routes, and turn the tide of the battle in their favor, much as they had in previous campaigns. Their formidable barrels and mounting mechanisms, making transportation and deployment a logistical challenge in the thick snow and muddy terrain. Yet the urgency of the situation spurred crews to work tirelessly, repositioning these weapons from their usual anti-aircraft roles into that of makeshift anti-tank batteries. The transformation was a testament to the adaptability and resilience of American forces when confronted with a threatening and seemingly unstoppable enemy. As these powerful 90mm guns were brought into action, their presence on the battlefield introduced a new element of danger for the German armored columns. The previously impenetrable King Tigers and Panthers, which had instilled fear and had been regarded as invincible by many, now faced a formidable foe that could punch through their thick armor. This shift in tactics marked a turning point. The defenders' ingenuity was now directly challenging the might of the German armored spearhead. Meanwhile, the German attack continued to unfold in the snow-laden landscape, with heavy traffic clogging the narrow, winding roads that snaked through the wooded, hilly terrain. These routes, designed long ago for smaller-scale movements, had become choke points critical to the progress of the German advance. As the lead tanks and supporting vehicles pressed forward, they inadvertently created vulnerabilities in their formation, exposing themselves at precisely those narrow corridors where American artillery and weapons had been stealthily placed. The advancing columns gradually slowed down as the terrain, combined with the thickening snow and fog, hampered their mobility and reduced visibility. The tight congestion along these critical paths turned into trap zones for the Germans, who had not anticipated such obstacles or the precise positioning of American defenses. Hidden among the trees and along crossroads, American artillery crews patiently waited for the oncoming armored formations to come within range, ready to unleash their devastating counterfire. Some of these defenses included the unexpected deployment of 90mm anti-aircraft weapons, normally employed to shoot down enemy aircraft, now silently guarding key routes against the armored threat. These guns, when finally activated, held the potential to inflict severe damage on the heavily armored German tanks. The element of surprise, coupled with the gun's increased firepower, threatened to turn the tide against the seemingly unstoppable armored columns. Amid the chaos of the breakthrough, American officers faced stark choices. Their traditional defensive strategies had been designed primarily for infantry and lighter enemy threats, not for an aggressive armored blitz of this magnitude. The rapid pace of the attack forced commanders to improvise on the spot, as their standard anti-tank weapons, such as the 57mm and 75mm guns, proved insufficient to reliably destroy the newer, more heavily armored German tanks. Desperation drove the decision to reassign the powerful 90mm anti-aircraft guns from their usual perch positions, moving them into direct combat roles against the advancing tanks. This bold shift transformed the battlefield, introducing a new threat that the Germans had not fully anticipated. These weapons, weighing nearly 9 tons each, required careful planning to transport and position in the snow-covered terrain, but their deployment proved crucial in establishing a more effective defensive line. The process of repositioning these weapons was complex and labor-intensive, often involving cranes, trucks, and significant logistical effort under difficult conditions. Crews worked tirelessly, overcoming the adverse weather and terrain, to ensure these guns could be brought into firing positions quickly. Once in place, the 90mm anti-aircraft guns became a key component in the American response. Their high-velocity shells capable of piercing the thick armor of the German tanks and turning the tide of the battle. This tactical innovation was a pivotal moment in the Battle of the Bulge, illustrating how resilience and resourcefulness could counter even a seemingly overwhelming assault. The German armored units, confident in their initial successes, now faced the reality that their heavily reinforced tanks were vulnerable to well-placed, powerful artillery fire. The American forces' ability to adapt quickly under pressure demonstrated that even in the face of formidable enemy technology, ingenuity and determination could alter the course of events. As the snow continued to fall heavily, blanketing the landscape in white and further impairing movement, the German advance slowed appreciably. The narrow roads, once the arteries of their assault, now turned into bottlenecks where American artillery and anti-tank guns lay in wait. These defenses, combined with the harsh winter conditions, created a formidable obstacle course that the Germans had not foreseen. In this environment of chaos and rapid change, American commanders and soldiers relied on their collective ingenuity, turning the tide against what had initially seemed like an unstoppable invasion. Their ability to quickly reconfigure their defenses, utilize unexpected weaponry, and exploit the terrain ultimately played a vital role in thwarting the German advance and preventing a potential collapse of Allied forces in this critical sector. Their vehicles, whether carriages or heavy trucks, were pressed into service for repositioning purposes, often requiring the use of large, tracked prime movers to move them from one location to another. The roads, already burdened by the relentless winter snowfall, became nearly impassable due to the accumulation of snow and debris. Abandoned vehicles and wreckage cluttered the pathways, rendering transportation a slow and hazardous undertaking. Despite these formidable obstacles, the gun crews demonstrated an extraordinary level of adaptability, often trained only for high-altitude air engagements, yet able to improvise effectively in ground combat scenarios. In some instances, units went so far as to strip unnecessary fire control systems from their weapons, sacrificing some aiming precision and sophistication to reduce weight and facilitate quicker targeting. Other crews would dig into the earth, anchoring their mounts into the ground to create stable firing platforms at strategic points such as crossroads, village outskirts, or hilltops. Ammunition handlers hurriedly carried armor-piercing shells forward, frequently scavenging from depots that had not anticipated such an urgent and widespread demand, turning supply shortages into opportunities for resourcefulness. The scope of their improvisation extended beyond just hardware adjustments. Infantry units and engineers collaborated closely to conceal gun positions using snowbanks and natural foliage, transforming everyday winter camouflage into deadly ambush sites. Crews initially trained to calculate lead angles for fast-moving aircraft adapted to a more immediate and visceral form of target engagement. Instead of tracking aircraft across the sky, they now sighted through the trees at massive silhouettes of tanks approaching head-on along narrow lanes and roads. The discipline of their training proved invaluable. The gunners applied their knowledge of precision, timing, and maintaining a calm demeanor under pressure, skills they had previously mastered while engaging high-speed aircraft, to ground targets under the stress of combat. An especially noteworthy example of this adaptability was seen in units supporting the 2nd Armored Division during the German push toward critical Belgian villages. On the orders of their officers, the 90mm artillery batteries were tasked with covering the flanks, particularly in areas where the more mobile Sherman tanks alone could not provide adequate defense. These guns were set up at strategic crossroads and hidden behind stone walls or other natural cover, patiently waiting until the approaching German armor came within roughly 1,000 meters. At this distance, the high velocity of the 90mm shells gave them the firepower to penetrate the formidable frontal armor of the Panther tanks. Reports from these engagements detailed how shells punched through turret armor with lethal efficiency, igniting fuel supplies inside the tanks and forcing German crews to abandon vehicles that had once appeared invulnerable. However, not all deployments were without issues. The size and visibility of the guns meant that once their positions were discovered, they became prime targets for enemy artillery and mortars. German units, equipped with their own artillery and mortar fire, often zeroed in on these positions as soon as they opened fire, leading to heavy casualties among the crews before they could shift to new locations. Despite these dangers, the destructive power of the weapons justified the inherent risks. American tank destroyers, such as the M36 Jackson, also mounted the same 90mm guns. However, their limited numbers meant they could not cover the entire front. To fill the gaps, towed versions of these weapons were employed, despite the logistical complications involved in their movement and emplacement. What resulted was a patchwork network of resistance, stitched together through ingenuity, daring, and steadfast determination. American commanders, recognizing that rigid adherence to doctrine was insufficient in such dynamic circumstances, placed a high value on the initiative of their local officers and non-commissioned officers. These leaders made tactical decisions in the field, choosing optimal locations for their guns, often at crossroads like Barak Dur, outside Baston Village, or on the approaches to Same V, where they could do the most damage. In these makeshift defensive setups, crews operating the 90mm guns fought side by side with infantry, creating impromptu defenses that succeeded in disrupting the German timetable of advance. Each tank destroyed and each armor piece knocked out slowed the enemy's progress, buying precious hours that could be used to mobilize reserves or set up more effective defensive lines. Turning a weapon initially designed for air defense into a ground attack tool exemplified the resourcefulness of the American forces. By repurposing and deploying the 90mm gun in ground combat, they expanded the reach and versatility of their arsenal, turning what could have been mere anti-aircraft artillery into a potent tank-killing weapon capable of contesting the heavily armored German tanks on their own turf. The battlefield displayed a new kind of unpredictability that German military planners had clearly failed to foresee. Where once improvisation was merely a matter of quick thinking and adaptability, it now became a vital necessity for survival. As the German forces pressed forward, this improvisation gradually morphed into a form of resistance, powerful enough to challenge and even blunt the heavily anticipated armored breakthroughs that the German command believed would ensure swift victory. The first encounters between the formidable 90mm caliber guns and the German armor produced shock waves that reverberated through both armies, altering the course of the battle. On the 17th and 18th of December, when the German offensive was still riding high in momentum, their advancing tank columns, which were pushing through the narrow winding roads of the Ardennes, unexpectedly encountered ambushes unlike any they had encountered before in the war. These ambushes not only surprised the Germans, but also demonstrated the resilience and ingenuity of their opponents. The German units, expecting only to face American Shermans or perhaps some lighter anti-tank weapons, were taken aback to see their pride. Tanks like the Panther and the Tiger II burst into flames after being struck by well-aimed shots. Survivor testimonies paint vivid pictures of these intense moments. Near the villages of Krinkel and Roscherath, which had fallen into the path of the 12th SS Panzer Division, American artillerymen had cleverly placed their 90mm guns behind cover, such as rubble heaps and hedgerows. When the German armor attempted to push through these carefully concealed positions, The American gunners fired from distances ranging roughly between 700 and 900 meters. The shells struck the sides of the Panthers, penetrating their distinctive sloped armor with surprising effectiveness, while others punched through the glass of the frontal turrets at closer ranges. Consequently, the infantry supporting the tanks suddenly found themselves exposed and vulnerable, forced to dive for cover as wrecks of burning tanks blocked the narrow roadways. German officers, who had confidently assured their troops of an unstoppable advance, were faced with a brutal and unexpected reality: that American firepower had developed a new level of lethality. Near St. Vith, similar scenes unfolded as armored spearheads from the 5th Panzer Army clashed with defenses that had been hastily reinforced with these 90mm guns. One artillery battery reported shooting down half a dozen tanks in a single engagement, forcing the remaining German armor to withdraw and attempt to regroup. Tank crews from the German side, who had been conditioned to shrug off the sting of lighter weapons and believed their heavy armor could withstand most assaults, suddenly realized the peril of lingering in exposed positions. To increase their chances of survival, some units began employing smoke screens and artillery barrages to shield their movements. Yet even these measures couldn't fully protect them from the precise, high-velocity fire of the American guns. For the American defenders, these encounters served as a significant boost to morale. Soldiers, many of whom had previously felt helpless against the imposing silhouettes of Tigers and Panthers, now watched in astonishment as these mighty German tanks were destroyed right before their eyes. Infantrymen, whether huddled in foxholes, manning roadblocks, or advancing cautiously, could often hear the cheers erupting around them as massive German tanks ground to a halt, their turrets blown open or crews bailing out into the snow-covered terrain. The realization spread rapidly among both sides. With these advanced weapons in play, even the most heavily armored German tanks could be stopped effectively. The mere presence of these guns began to shift the psychological landscape on the battlefield, instilling doubt among the German units about the invincibility of their armor. Rumors circulated that the Americans had secretly introduced new, super weaponry. Some believed the guns were British 17-pounders or experimental prototypes hurried into battle by desperate efforts. In truth, these weapons were nothing more than refined versions of existing artillery and anti-tank guns, but the aura of secrecy and surprise surrounding them magnified their impact enormously. Tank commanders, previously confident that they could break through lightly armed American lines, suddenly found their plans thwarted and their maneuvers more cautious. The battlefield had shifted. The illusion of unstoppable German armor was beginning to fade, replaced by the stark reality of rapidly advancing American anti-tank capabilities. Certainly, here is a deeply reworked and expanded version of your original text, crafted into a smooth literary narrative with enhanced clarity and detail, all while preserving the core facts and meaning. As the momentum of the Ardennes offensive faltered and waned, the entire strategic initiative that the Germans had so desperately pinned their hopes on began to unravel before their eyes. The evidence on the battlefield was impossible to ignore. Roads once bustling with enemy movement now lay strewn with the wreckage of shattered German armor, many of which still smoldered beneath a cold and relentless blanket of falling snow. This destructive scene served as a stark visual indictment of the German attack's faltering progress. In some instances, American engineers, leveraging the wrecked vehicles remaining from previous fights, would repurpose these metallic carcasses into makeshift barricades. They positioned these obstacles across key routes, not only blocking the advance but also drastically reducing the speed of the enemy columns. These inventive defenses, born of necessity amid chaos, slowed the Germans' relentless push and bought crucial time for American forces to regroup. Later, German prisoners, taken in the aftermath of these encounters, would express genuine astonishment at the formidable resilience shown by the American anti-aircraft units, who had unexpectedly transformed their guns into effective ground-fire weapons. They admitted that they had never anticipated such fierce, accurate, and sustained defensive fire from these units, which had turned the tables decisively. What initially appeared as a desperate improvisation quickly evolved into a standard tactical approach. The deployment of the formidable 90mm anti-aircraft guns became widespread wherever American units had the capability to set them up, turning their positions into effective defensive strongholds. These first encounters, fought amidst the swirling snow and icy landscape, marked a significant turning point in the battle. While they did not stop the German offensive entirely, they demonstrated unmistakably that the feared German spearheads, those seemingly unstoppable panzers, were vulnerable and could be slowed or even temporarily halted through skillful, adaptable defense. This realization began to crack the myth of the invincible German armored spear. American troops, showing remarkable ingenuity and resilience, proved that even the mightiest armored units could be vulnerable when faced with determined resistance and strategically placed weaponry. Subsequent encounters carried with them the vivid memory of these early engagements, where the unexpected strength of American anti-armor firepower had emerged as a decisive factor. As December deepened and the snow continued to fall, the Ardennes region became less a battlefield of swift, decisive armored thrusts and more a grueling contest of endurance, where each side sought to outlast the other amidst the bitter winter. The original German plan relied heavily on rapid, aggressive advances designed to punch through Allied lines before stiff resistance could be mounted. Yet as the fighting intensified at critical junctures, some villages and crossroads, once just waypoints, became fortified bastions of resistance. Places like Bastogne, Saint-Vith, and smaller hamlets scattered across the snow-covered forests achieved legendary status precisely because American units managed to hold them long enough to disrupt the German schedule and supply lines. In this fierce struggle, the 90mm guns played an indispensable role in stiffening defenses where armored support was limited or temporarily unavailable. The 7th Armored Division, entrusted with protecting the approaches to Saint-Vith, repeatedly found itself under relentless assault from units of the 5th Panzer Army. When terrain bottlenecks channeled German tanks into narrow attack corridors, American commanders swiftly deployed their 90mm batteries to cover these vulnerable routes. Reports from the period vividly describe how these guns, strategically positioned on ridges or behind embankments, obliterated multiple enemy vehicles before they could come within effective range of their targets, often destroying entire squads of tanks in a matter of moments. At Saint-Vith itself, delaying actions, though arduous and costly, extended the fighting for nearly a week, effectively denying the Germans a vital road junction critical for their continued advance. Each day of resistance allowed reinforcements from both the northern and southern sectors to arrive, tightening the noose around the German spearhead and gradually constricting their tactical options. The American defenders' resilience, combined with the strategic placement of their weapons, slowed the enemy's momentum and created vital windows of opportunity for counteroffensive preparations. Similarly, at Bastogne, defended by the storied 101st Airborne Division, the 90mm guns contributed significantly to the town's defenses. While these paratroopers are most famously remembered for holding the town against the Germans' relentless assault, the supporting artillery units, hidden amid snow-covered fields and behind frozen embankments, played a decisive supplementary role. These batteries, expertly concealed to prevent enemy detection, provided critical anti-armor firepower that decimated approaching German tanks and assault vehicles. When enemy armored units attempted to encircle the town, these guns unleashed their devastating long-range fire, ripping into the advancing columns. Eyewitness accounts recount cheering and frantic excitement among the paratroopers as American forces, despite their relatively modest numbers, made a significant impact on the battlefield through their strategic deployment of heavy weaponry. The presence of a limited number of powerful artillery units, particularly the 89mm guns, served to dramatically enhance the defensive capabilities of their thinly spread units. When properly positioned and accurately aimed, a single artillery battery could effectively command and dominate strategic routes, be it a vital road or a narrow valley, compelling the German forces to either commit overwhelming, disproportionate force or seek alternative, less predictable routes to bypass these formidable obstacles. These delaying tactics often proved decisive, disrupting the otherwise tight timetable that the Germans had meticulously planned. For the German attack to succeed, holding the line was not simply a matter of firepower, but also depended heavily on seamless coordination among various Allied units. Effective communication lines ensured that artillery crews, infantry units, engineering teams, and tank detachments operated in a synchronized manner. For example, The 89mm guns worked in concert with minefields, specialized bazooka teams, and Sherman tanks, creating a dynamic and flexible defensive network. This orchestration of diverse resources demonstrated a growing sophistication in American combined arms tactics, illustrating how battlefield improvisation could develop into a cohesive and efficient defensive system. Environmental conditions played a crucial role in magnifying the effectiveness of these weapons. Harsh winter weather, with its poor visibility in snow-laden forests, restricted German maneuverability and funneled their tanks into exposed and predictable positions. As German columns advanced, they often encountered roads clogged with wrecked armored vehicles, causing further delays and chaos. These bottlenecks became prime targets for American artillery crews, who, knowing the strategic importance of these choke points, fired relentlessly. Every tank destroyed was more than a simple loss in numbers. It was a setback that hindered the Germans' ability to regroup swiftly and launch another coordinated assault. By the end of December, it was clear that while the American defensive line had been stretched and battered, it remained unbroken, an important stalwart amidst the mounting difficulties. The slowing German advance was significantly due to the persistent resistance of American units fighting under freezing, treacherous conditions. Their resilience was matched by the formidable firepower of the 89mm guns, which transformed scattered strongpoints into sturdy bastions of defense. These fortified positions prevented the Germans from achieving the rapid breakthrough they desperately sought, effectively stalling their offensive momentum. The cumulative effect of American resistance, combined with the strategic placement of heavy artillery, slowed the German push to a crawl, sapping their momentum and sown with delays. This deterioration of the German offensive was also influenced by critical misjudgments, both at the strategic level in Berlin and on the battlefield. German intelligence services operated on outdated and overly optimistic assessments of Allied strength and disposition. Their reconnaissance efforts primarily focused on known quantities like Sherman tanks and tank destroyer battalions, neglecting to account for the American tendency to repurpose and adapt weapons beyond their original doctrinal roles. For instance, the 89mm gun was officially classified and perceived mainly as an anti-aircraft weapon, a role in which it was perceived to pose little threat to armored vehicles. This fundamental underestimation led German commanders to believe that only specialized British weapons, such as the 17-pounder, could pose a serious threat to their heavy tanks. Consequently, German tank crews approached the Ardennes offensive with unwarranted confidence, often advancing along narrow roads with minimal caution. They believed that only mines or concentrated artillery fire could effectively impede their progress, leading them to charge headlong into American defenses. This overconfidence proved disastrous when they encountered the unexpected resistance of battlements fortified with 89mm guns, which inflicted significant damage. Reports from the front indicated that German formations frequently rushed down narrow roads, betting on the assumption that only mines or artillery would pose serious resistance. This tactic proved catastrophic when, unexpectedly, many tanks were seen burning and abandoned in the snow, victims of the very weapons the Germans had underestimated and had failed to prepare adequately against. In the end, these overlooked weapons and the strategic miscalculations based on their underappreciation played a pivotal role in thwarting the German offensive. The 89mm guns, initially dismissed as mere anti-aircraft artillery, became a vital obstacle that slowed, damaged, and ultimately curtailed the momentum of the German attack. Their relentless fire and the fierce resistance of American units in freezing winter conditions exemplified how adaptability and strategic foresight could turn the tide of battle, even against numerically superior foes. Logistical shortcomings significantly compounded the initial miscalculations during the Ardennes offensive, turning what was already a high-stakes gamble into a broader strategic disaster. The operation heavily depended on impeccable timing and precise coordination, aiming to swiftly seize vital Allied fuel depots to cripple their mechanized units. Such a plan left no room for error. Any unforeseen delay would cause fuel supplies to dwindle rapidly, setting off a chain reaction of logistical failures. In this context, every setback, no matter how minor, risked spiraling out of control, with fuel consumption soaring beyond manageable limits, further undermining German operational capacity. Ironically, some of the very weapons intended to break through enemy defenses inadvertently worsened Germany's supply predicament. The German 90-millimeter guns, designed as formidable anti-tank weapons, were employed at critical choke points to destroy Allied tanks and impede their advances. However, in doing so, they sometimes tore through enemy vehicles at strategic junctures. But this often came at a cost. The destruction of tanks and vehicles behind the front lines, rather than easing the German supply problem, contributed to creating a bottleneck. Wrecked tanks blocked roads and bottlenecked supply routes, leading to the unnecessary burning of precious gasoline. Meanwhile, the scarce recovery and repair vehicles, vital for removing wreckage and restoring mobility, were few in number and frequently vulnerable to ambushes, further delaying efforts to keep the front line supplied. After the battle, German military diaries reveal a growing sense of frustration and mounting anxiety among the officers and soldiers involved. Many tank crews expressed their exasperation with being stranded on frozen roads, encircled by the destruction wrought by their own forces and the enemy's fire. The inability to move forward or retreat effectively weighed heavily on morale, adding a psychological strain that extended far beyond the immediate battlefield. The cumulative effect of these logistical and tactical failures undermined confidence at all levels. Support infantry units, tasked with backing up the armored advances, grew increasingly hesitant to push forward. Their reluctance was fueled by the inexplicable and often sudden losses suffered by the spearheading tank formations. Many soldiers had been led to believe that their offensive would achieve a swift breakthrough, a momentum that would carry them rapidly towards victory. Instead, by the late days of December, the initial bold assaults had devolved into grinding, attritional combat that sapped morale and depleted resources. The once assured promise of a rapid victory was replaced by a grim reality. Soldiers and commanders alike questioned whether victory was still within reach, especially when some of the most advanced German tanks, such as the Tigers and Panthers, were found abandoned and useless, their armor riddled by weapons many did not recognize or expect. Strategically, the problem was worsened by the German High Command's insistence on secrecy and centralization of control. Hitler's directive to keep plans tightly under wraps meant that critical information about evolving battlefield conditions often failed to reach frontline officers in time. As a result, many commanders lacked accurate, real-time intelligence about American firepower and tactics, leading to disastrous decisions or repeated mistakes. Communication failures meant that battalions often received outdated or incorrect reports, which caused them to send their armored units into ambush zones where American 90-millimeter guns were ready to fire. This pattern of misjudgment led to a heavy wastage of manpower and vehicles, luxuries that the German army, already strained by the harsh winter of 1944, could scarcely afford. In stark contrast to the German doctrine, which emphasized concentrated armored assaults aimed at breaking through enemy lines swiftly, the Americans displayed remarkable adaptability. They quickly learned to disperse their forces, repositioning their artillery and tanks to respond flexibly to German tactics. By the time the Germans recognized the threat posed by the 90-millimeter guns, the pattern of American resilience and ingenuity had already been set in motion. The defensive belts that the Germans sought to shape using these weapons had become solidified, and the opportunity for a clean breakthrough effectively vanished. The misjudgment regarding the American artillery's versatility and tactical flexibility was only one among a long list of errors committed during the Ardennes campaign. The Germans relied heavily on the hope that poor weather conditions would provide cover from American air power and reconnaissance. But this assumption proved flawed. They underestimated the depth of Allied logistical support, which allowed the Americans to sustain their forces despite the initial setbacks. Moreover, the Germans believed that surprise alone could compensate for their growing shortages of men, equipment, and fuel. But this optimism faded as the campaign dragged on. The oversight concerning the potential of the 90-millimeter guns ultimately came to symbolize the broader flaws in German strategic planning. The German High Command had assumed that their opponents would remain predictable, relying on established tactics and logistical routines. Instead, the Americans demonstrated a remarkable capacity for battlefield innovation, transforming what was initially seen as a liability into one of the most decisive tools of the campaign. The American forces adapted quickly, employing their artillery in versatile and unexpected ways, turning the tide in their "During the Battle of the Bulge," The 90mm anti-aircraft gun proved to be far more than just a defensive artillery piece. It demonstrated its remarkable versatility and capacity to alter battlefield dynamics when employed with ingenuity. Originally designed for air defense, this formidable weapon's performance against armored vehicles revealed a significant and unexpected capability that would influence the course of the conflict. Its high-velocity, heavy-caliber rounds, when used creatively by American soldiers, showed that they could decisively impact engagements involving German tanks and assault guns, a revelation that challenged previous assumptions about the weapon's role on the battlefield. As the battle unfolded, the raw figures and detailed after-action reports painted a compelling picture of the weapon's impact. German forces suffered devastating losses, totaling close to 600 tanks and assault guns during the campaign. Many of these were destroyed in close-quarters combat, where the 90mm gun's fire was critical in breaching the frontal armor of even some of the most formidable German tanks, such as the Panther and occasionally the dreaded Tiger II. This was a surprising development, as prior to this, the prevailing belief among frontline soldiers was that only the combined power of Allied air superiority or concentrated artillery could effectively neutralize German heavy armor. The implications of these findings extended well beyond the immediate battlefield triumphs. Military analysts and officers recognized that the success of the 90mm gun had fundamentally shifted their understanding of anti-tank warfare. The reports compiled by U.S. Army ordnance officers emphasized that, under the right conditions, the weapon's armor-piercing rounds could penetrate even the heavily armored fronts of the most feared German tanks, transforming the perception of the weapon's potential and inspiring renewed confidence among American troops. This tangible proof of the 90mm gun's capabilities prompted a significant evolution in U.S. military strategy. The successful deployment of this weapon during the Battle of the Bulge validated the decision to mount it permanently on key armored vehicles, notably on the M36 Jackson tank destroyer and later on the M26 Pershing heavy tank. When the Pershing first saw combat in early 1945, it was armed with a 90mm main gun, an artillery system directly descended from the one that had demonstrated its effectiveness in the Ardennes. This marked a clear turning point in American armored tactics, shifting away from reliance solely on medium-caliber weapons and toward a new emphasis on matching or even surpassing German firepower. The Germans, not blind to these developments, took note of the American advances. Interrogations of prisoners and captured documents revealed that German commanders were taken by surprise at how swiftly and effectively the Americans had adapted their use of existing weapon systems in unexpected ways. They admitted that the emergence of this unexpected anti-tank firepower had begun to erode the confidence of panzer units and disrupted their operational momentum. For forces that had long prided itself on technological innovation, most notably the 88mm gun, the American improvisation represented an ironic reversal. By late 1944, it was the Americans who had arguably taken the lead in battlefield adaptability and resourcefulness. Beyond the immediate tactical lessons, the legacy of the 90mm gun at the Battle of the Bulge reflected a broader strategic truth about wartime production and ingenuity. It underscored that industrial flexibility, combined with soldier ingenuity and tactical flexibility, could outmatch even the most formidable enemy equipment. American gunners, often operating under harsh conditions, with little rest and in freezing weather, demonstrated that deploying the right weapon with decisive intent could blunt an offensive designed to decisively change the outcome of the war. Their determined efforts delayed German advances long enough for Allied reinforcements to arrive, ultimately helping to secure the encirclement and defeat of Hitler's last offensive in the West. In the years following the war, the reputation of the 90mm gun only continued to grow. It became the standard armament on American heavy tanks throughout the 1950s and significantly influenced NATO's tactical doctrines during the early Cold War period. The lessons learned during the Ardennes campaign shaped training manuals, emphasizing that no single weapon should be confined to a single role if the circumstances called for versatility and adaptability. Veterans who had served with the gun recalled the Battle of the Ardennes as a clear proof that battlefield success depended heavily on flexibility, resourcefulness, and the willingness to employ existing technology in innovative ways. They believed that this adaptability exemplified during that pivotal campaign, could often be as decisive as the raw numbers of troops or the sophistication of technology itself, an enduring lesson in the importance of creative problem-solving in warfare. The story of the 90-millimeter gun during the Battle of the Bulge extends far beyond a mere tactical detail in military history. It symbolizes the unpredictable and often chaotic essence of warfare, where a weapon initially designed for a specific role can unexpectedly become the decisive factor in shaping the outcome of a conflict. This particular incident serves as a stark reminder that in war, assumptions about one's adversaries and their capabilities can be dangerously flawed, and that ingenuity and adaptability often play a crucial role in turning the tide of battle. For the German forces, the unexpected impact of this weapon underscored a harsh reality. Underestimating the resourcefulness and resilience of the enemy could lead to disastrous consequences. Conversely, for the Allied side, it exemplified the importance of unwavering resolve, innovative thinking, and persistent effort in the face of relentless assaults from the formidable Reich. The narrative of this gun during that pivotal campaign thus transcends its immediate tactical significance, encapsulating the broader lessons of resilience, ingenuity, and the unpredictable nature of warfare itself.